Hey everybody, this is Doug Curtin, the host of Chalk Talk. We have another great episode in store for you guys today. Before we get started though, I know that a lot of folks are jumping out of their fall season, so congrats on a good season. And a lot of folks like myself are jumping into their winter season. So wherever you are in your training cycle, be sure to go check out platform.com. That's pltforum.com to find relevant content and material wherever you are in that phase and cycle. Some folks want to get started with their younger athletes in some intro programs now that the season's over. Others are ready to hit the off season full-fledged. Others are ready to jump into a different in-season training program. We have all of those at pltforum.com. We're always happy to share and talk with anybody interested in learning more. We're going to just get set up here. This is Chalk Talk presented by Platform. I'm Doug Curtin. Let's go. On today's episode, we welcome on Sam Breslin. Sam,
good morning.
Thank you for joining us on another chalk-filled Chalk Talk. We got a doozy today because we are going to be talking about energy systems when it comes to training. And it's a topic near and dear to my heart because as a swim coach, we're always talking about training different types of energy systems. And you know, for lack of a better word, we're really kind of talking about conditioning. For the most basic concept. So how do you kind of equate the combination of when we talk about energy systems and when we start to kind of get into the different types of conditioning, for lack of a better word?
Sure. I think it's worth just explaining what we're talking about here is the fact that your body requires something called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, to basically operate at all, right? So if you need to pick something up, you need to jog, you need to walk, your body is going to require that, like gasoline in your car, in order to perform. And your body has enough ATP in its muscles to operate for a short period of time under strenuous activity, but that's it. And so if you want to do something for more than 15 seconds, which by the way is basically most of your life, right? You're going to need to deliver more ATP to your muscle cells,
sure.
Depending on how much you need, how long you need it, etc. And so the body actually has a few different ways of doing that. So when we talk about conditioning or energy systems, we're talking about how do you give your muscles, your engine, the fuel that it needs to perform whatever task you are trying to accomplish.
Sure, and a lot of it's just naturally there, and what we talk about a lot in terms of training is building it up to be better or to get more, or what does that mean in like the terms of like working towards that level of it?
Yeah, and we'll get to the how, but when we're talking about conditioning, we're talking about literally improving the processes by which your body creates that ATP so that you can do it more efficiently, more quickly, more in total.
Yep.
The unique thing, though, is that there are actually three separate processes by which your body creates ATP, and they're very unique. They do it in different ways, different amounts, and different speeds, and that's where we come up with that concept of energy system. So you've probably heard it as the metabolic pathways, the energy pathways, energy systems. Those are the three things that we're going to kind of talk about first. Those are the ways in which your body creates ATP for use in exercise.
Sure. And for me, again, back in kind of my own background, it always was aerobic versus anaerobic. And you're saying there's three, and I want to make sure like that's how it's always been presented. I think a lot of people in terms of conditioning, it's like, hey, we're either going, long and maintained, or we're going fast and, you can't hold on to it. So what are those three, just kind of simply put, so we can kind of lay out some definitions?
Sure, yeah. The study of bioenergetics in humans in exercise is how you create energy depending on duration and intensity. And there's actually three very distinct ways, two of which are anaerobic, and one is aerobic. And Just to clarify, anaerobic means without the presence of oxygen, so it doesn't require oxygen. Aerobic does. So it probably makes sense to kind of start at the beginning then. So, the first way that your body creates energy, it's actually what kicks on the moment you do anything at all, and is what we talked about is able to kind of provide for you for a short period of time, even under strenuous activity, demand, and that's called the phosphocreatine system, the phosphagen system, the alactic system, and long story short, the way this works is if you are doing something that is of, call it explosive effort, we're talking sprints, throws, lifting weights, and it's something that's only going to take 6 seconds, 10 seconds, 12 seconds. Some people would argue it occurs up to even 30 seconds. You're going to create that ATP using the supply you already have in your cells, and then the combination of phosphocreatine, which is something that exists already in your muscle cells, and the byproduct of when you actually use that ATP, you get ADP, so adenosine diphosphate, and then you combine that with the creatine phosphate, you take the high energy phosphate, slap them together, and you can actually replenish that ATP really quickly, and you can do it at high levels. Mm-hmm. But the issue is it runs out. You can only do that for so long. So that's when we're saying you're going to do something explosive for, there's a range here, so I don't want to get too tied up into actual durations, but call it 10 to 12 seconds.
Yeah, and I think we'll spend some time later in the episode talking about kind of what comes up with a lot of this different type of stuff in terms of like work to rest ratios. Sure. And we can definitely get to that. So that's the first one, right? Yep. It's kind of the short spurt, the quickest. So now let's take a step up the ladder. What comes next?
Yeah. I like to think of it, I heard it from another trainer, I think an OPEX guy, that said that first kind of window, that energy system, they like to refer to it as like the gains system. So sprints, lifting weights, when you're going to see some serious kind of bro sciencey gains.
Yep.
Right? And it's a good way to remember it, because the next one is alliteration or rhyming, I guess, aside, they refer to as pain. Mm-hmm. And now we're talking about the glycolytic system, which is anaerobic glycolysis, or the lactic system. And what we're talking about here is the breakdown and the use of muscle glucose for the production of ATP without oxygen. So you're talking about anaerobic respiration, which, honestly, long story short, think of it as the first system, phosphocreatine, you're going to create a whole lot of energy, but not for very long. We're just going to go one step down. Mm-hmm. We're going to be able to create a bunch of energy, not quite as much, but for a little bit longer, but not forever.
Yeah, and so that time range, because we said kind of anywhere from 6 to 10 seconds up to 20, 30, some people argue, where does that next one lead us to? Like, how long can you work within that anaerobic?
Yeah, your anaerobic threshold, or as far as you can go, that can depend. Again, I don't want to get too tied up in the durations, because it depends on, you can utilize that system for 60 seconds of all-out effort, or maybe 2 minutes of 85 to 90%, and it's going to primarily still be the engine that's moving you. So you could call that anywhere from 6 seconds or 30 seconds up to 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Yeah. But it's that window of, the way I think of it personally, the easiest is, not surprisingly nicknamed that pain zone, is, as a former track guy, the 400-meter sprint.
Sure.
So if you're out racing a 400-meter, we all know what that feels like at the end. That has been a complete use and complete depletion of your anaerobic energy pathway.
Right, and we can talk, at nauseam almost, as you're kind of already sticking in for the caveats as we go, is like there is some overlap, and there's some ways that we're not always living just in one, because as you kind of approach the end of a race and you've totally tapped one energy system, you might have to start to tap into another. Is that fair? Or?
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to this, but the long and short of it is you are never in anything but all three.
Right. Because
never just one.
Yeah, because to me, we always, and swimming background again, we always talk about, all right, this is an anaerobic set, this is an aerobic set, but there are different things that start to kick in into some of those different sets or different training styles that you need to rely on the other ones. You're never solely just kind of like slamming one or the other, at least for me in coaching at the high school level, in my experience.
Well, I'm even just more talking from a biological perspective. It's physically impossible for all three systems to not be on together.
Yeah.
The moment you do anything,
Okay.
all three are working.
Mm-hmm.
With the best way to think of it is which one is the dominant player.
Right.
If all three are on, which one's doing 80%?
Yeah, who's the lead fiddle? Sure.
So, at the beginning, when you're lifting weights, so let's say you do a 10-second set, you're in that phosphocreatine system, right? But what happens to you like after you do a set of 8 to 10? You're going to notice you have an elevated heart rate, your respiration's increased. Why is that? It's because your aerobic system has started to turn on because it's anticipating future work.
Sure.
And they all work in concert with one another. So, and that we're going to get to like how that kind of plays out and why that's important to understand.
Sure.
But do know that even though we're talking about these in kind of a linear fashion, they are 1,000% concurrent and they work together.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's a good setup and a great point. So now that you've kind of almost set yourself up in referencing that aerobic one, let's just break that one down like we did the first two, just in terms of, the main takeaways, time frames, things like that, so we clearly define all three.
Yep. So the third system, in direct opposition to the anaerobic systems, is called the aerobic system. You can call it oxidative, you can call it aerobic respiration. Long story short, it is the way in which you can create ATP through oxygen-present glycolysis, which is going to, as we said, a lot of energy, short amount of time in the first one, somewhere in the middle on the second, and now we're in a lot less energy, but almost forever.
Yeah, maintained.
All right, you can maintain that, and not surprisingly, that's why that OPEC system, again, I don't want to say I'm stealing it, or I don't want to pretend that it's mine, they call that the sustain. So anything that you can maintain over time, or anytime you're doing anything maintained, you're going to be using primarily the aerobic system. And so that is going to be the opposite of that lactic system that we talked about. You're creating energy without the presence of oxygen, which leads to the buildup of lactate. Aerobic, you don't have that.
Sure.
Which is why you can theoretically kind of improve to the point where it just can work over and over. Yeah,
so kind of gain, pain, sustain. Really good definition of all three of those. I think both from a really kind of sciencey look at it, and I hate using that word sciencey, but it is. And then really just kind of the application when we start to look at things, because I think a lot of times people listening and people interested want to see like, where do I see it? What does it look like? So we kind of have, the lifting weights or the quick sprints, the longer, more like painful 400-meter run, and then, things that you could do forever or a really long time,
long, slow distance.
Yeah, sure.
Your classic cardio, right? But that also could be repeated sprint efforts, anything that's going to have you continuing, for a consistent period of time. It would be under that aerobic umbrella.
Sure. And, that's kind of where I think I get caught up a little bit, is in terms of when we start to talk about the cardio stuff. Because like in a lot of ways, you just mentioned like, repeated sprints. And that to me, my bells start ringing sprint, I think anaerobic. But if it's repeated, does it start to kind of trend into the aerobic? So how do you start to like break those different groups down, or how do you think about like that kind of word cardio when it comes to these training systems?
I think what we need to now turn to is the concept of conditioning in general, because I think there is a connotation for what conditioning is, which is just essentially anything effort related.
Yeah.
But when we're talking conditioning, we're actually talking the training of energy systems, and how do you actually apply work that creates adaptation, and how do you create them through each of those three? Because obviously there are reasons to want to improve all three. And you can. So I guess the first thing is, just like anything in our field, adaptation occurs when you place external stress, right? So just like when you lift weights under a heavy weight, under fatigue, like we talked with hypertrophy, your muscle grow. Wants to be able to handle that stress more easily in the future.
Sure.
If we're talking energy systems, if you stress, say, the phosphocreatine, or let's say you stress the aerobic system, your body is going to adapt so that it is better suited to handle that in the future. So for example, if you do a lot of aerobic stress work, your cardiac output and volume is going to increase, your heart will actually get bigger, you're going to be able to deliver fatty acids more efficiently, you're going to be able to oxidize fat, your fat metabolism will go up. You just get better at that system.
Yep.
Same thing for anaerobic. If you're going to go, if you're going to train exclusively in the glycolytic, which would be very, very painful, you're going to basically get better at storing glucose for fuel. You're actually going to be able to maintain that buffer a lot longer. So, we talked about when you do work within the glycolytic system, if you're dominating your energy creation there, what's going to happen is that you're actually going to get a buildup of hydrogen ions because of the lack of oxygen during the glycolysis chain, and what that will do is eventually just kind of shut your muscles off. That's what you get that muscle burn from. It's lactic acid's not like a thing, right? Like we hear about that a lot, right? So we can come back to that if we want, but what's actually happening is without the oxygen, you're going to build up to a point where you can't clear out those hydrogen ions, and that's where you feel the burn. You just have to stop. And then you can get, like I said, better at that. You can buffer better, you can remove that waste easier, so you can maintain for a lot longer. So we said somebody's anaerobic threshold might be a minute, it might be 3 minutes, depends on how they've trained it. And then lastly, if you are working in that 10 seconds, 6 second, or whatever, you can actually improve how quickly you replace your phosphocreatine, which is going to allow you to replenish ATP over and over and over again. So you could actually do that more quickly and for longer periods of time.
Sure.
So the trick to all of that, though, is if you actually want to improve a system, you have to make sure that when you're training it, it is the dominant system you're using.
Yeah.
And this is where everybody gets screwed up.
Well, I was going to say, so even at points there, I'm trying to keep up with the mind at race in terms of all the ATPs and all the different,
Slow me down.
Yes, I trust me, I will. Because at this point in the conversation, making it the dominant one, or making it the leading fiddle, to go back to my bad analogy, is how do you look at that then in the most simplest form in terms of like a training program? And I know I always push you on that to say, like, where do you see it? What does it look like in terms of what's leading and what's going? Like, can we break that down just in plain English of where it is in a program?
Yeah. And I'm going to use running as probably the easiest example. We've got a little backing up truck here. We've got the beep beeps going. So to bring it back, so where do those exist, or how do you create the environment that trains a specific system?
Yeah.
I look at it in two ways. You got to look at the intensity of the exercise or action performed. So we're talking, let's talk sprints.
Yeah.
You're either going all out or low intensity, right? Like you are sprinting to your maximal capacity, or you are maybe jogging nice and easy. All right, so intensity is one piece, and then the other piece is how much time do you have to recover between your efforts.
So that's where we get into the
biggest piece.
Yeah, and that's the toughest part of like the work to rest ratios that everybody starts to reference in these type of energy system conversations.
Yes, and so this is the biggest thing that I think people get, one, too specific on, or two, not specific enough.
Yeah.
And it's entirely important to understand that if you want to actually train, say, the glycolytic system, all right, you can absolutely put somebody into that system one time, say, hey, I want you to run for 60 seconds at 95% of your total capacity.
Sure.
The issue is that it is physically impossible for that person to do that again unless they rest for anywhere from 3 to 5 times the time they spent working.
Yep.
That might seem like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever. Well, if you're doing something like a minute sprint, you're running 400s. If you want to actually train the glycolytic system, you then have to run for a minute and rest for 5.
Yeah.
Which becomes difficult if you're saying that you don't want to be there for more than 10 to 15 minutes in your conditioning. So how do you run for 1 minute, rest for 5? That means every set is 6 minutes. So if you're doing anything from 3 to 5 to more than that sets, you're there for a long freaking time, which is why most people ignore that work to rest ratio. And if you do something like, hey, I want you to go all out, we want you to go all out for a minute, but I'm only going to give you a minute and a half, 2 minutes to recover. Anecdotally, when you look at that, you're like, that's plenty of rest. They'll be fine. They're not going to be able to operate at such a capacity that actually uses the glycolytic system again.
So it starts to trend
now
towards...
they're using their aerobic.
Yeah, totally fair. And I think, and my follow-up question to that, because I'm writing programs myself, in that same vein of, I want to get that max effort, and it's going to be around a minute sprint, and, it's 100 yards for swimming terms, but maybe it's not full-blown rest, you're just waiting, that's where, to me, I start to see, you can program in maybe some active recovery. Does that still count if it's 5 minutes of active? You're still moving.
Yeah. So,
or are you tapping? Are you still trending towards aerobic?
No. So here's the. Make sure I come back to this. Aerobic is, despite the just demonization of cardio, the single most important piece of this entire thing.
Because it's, to me, and not to take your answer, it's the base, right?
It's the foundation on which everything is built.
Yeah.
You cannot be good at those other two for anything more than one effort ever, unless you have a really good aerobic base. And we'll come back to that. But to your question, when we say work to rest, the real kind of trick to that is, there's a lot of variables at play. Could you be moving? Absolutely. It's less about activity versus absence of activity. It's your heart rate. If you are extremely in shape cardio-wise, and if just moving is zero strain on you, then you're actually bringing that heart rate back down. If you're somebody that the moment you go out for a jog and after 1 minute you're like, well, then that's not going to be something that actually takes you from that high 95% output back down to something where you're actually recovering.
Yeah.
So could you? Yes. If you were really advanced, and again, not necessarily applicable in the most literal sense for large groups in high school or whatever, you wouldn't look at it as distances or times for recovery. You'd actually look at it for heart rate.
Yep.
Right? You'd say, when we get back down to here, I know we're recovered, we can go after it again.
Yeah.
So maybe this is worth mentioning because it'll bridge us into everything else. Is the glycolytic is the single hardest to train because, one, you have to have the ability to get up to that 95% and really sell out, which everybody thinks is like an inherent ability. It's not, right? You have to build towards that.
Right.
And two, you then have to be able to recover in some sort of time that allows you to do it again.
Yeah.
And uniquely enough, they've done studies, whether it be American soccer or American football. Football or American football, aka soccer or football. You're actually not operating in the glycolytic system much at all. You are either in that super high energy for 6 to 10 seconds of a sprint, or you're in that I need to be moving for an hour, 2 hours, and everything in between, which is aerobic.
Sure.
And they've actually shown it's basically just those two. And so glycolytic is where I think a lot of people focus their time and energy, or they think they are, but realistically speaking, you're probably already training aerobic, which is good because that's what you need. And what you do need to also consider is the kind of call it the sprint side of things, or that high energy, that first system that will require, we're talking 12 to 15 to 20 times work to rest.
Yeah.
So if you sprint for 10 seconds, all out. Really, if you want to train speed, so here's a big thing. You need to identify your goals. I think that's where we need to kind of start, is what are you training? Are you training maximal speed, like one effort? Are you getting faster? Well, first, most of that's going to be in the gym. Did you squat? Did you deadlift? Did you create the force that you need to go faster? But you do need to train it, right? So you need to go swim it, you need to go run it. But to train speed, to increase the level of top-end speed, you cannot consider that conditioning in any way, shape, or form in the classical, colloquial sense of the word. You have to say, hey, we're going to sprint for 10 seconds, and I'm asking you to sell out. Move as fast as you can for 10 seconds. But if you want to actually train speed, then that 10 seconds is going to turn into 2 minutes of rest. So you're going to be working for 10 seconds and resting for 2.
Yep.
And that's sometimes hard for people to believe is useful because you aren't, but you don't want to be.
Yeah, because we're trying to train the muscles in the system and everything to kind of work together.
You can't get better at producing a whole lot of energy really fast unless that's what you're working on.
Yeah. And I think, even myself, my brain is spinning. There's about 1 million follow-up questions and things that we're going to come back to. Let's just take a quick break so you and I can regroup and see what else we need to touch on. And we'll cut away for one quick sec.
Sure.
Hey everybody, while we're taking this quick break and Sam's just getting some notes together for the second half of this episode, a friendly reminder to go check out platform.com. That's pltforum.com. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, however you get your social media at PLT, the number 4M. There is a lot to unpack here. We're taking a deep dive and working through it ourselves. It's a fun conversation to have that we do internally all the time. If you want to be a part of this conversation, reach out to us. We want to hear what you have in terms of day-to-day questions. We hear from a lot of people that just are trying to put it in the right perspective, not only for their fellow coaches and the fellow people they work with, but also the kids that they work with. Plain English, how does this whole thing of conditioning resonate? And that's what we're going to do when we jump back into the second half of this episode. So sit tight and we'll be right back. All right, we are jumping back in. We got Coach Brez with us today on Chalk Talk. It's been a really kind of jam-packed episode, a lot of science, a lot of breakdowns, talking about those different layers of conditioning. So I know we talked about track, we talked about swimming, and those are sports that primarily are sports that live in the world of conditioning, but for other coaches and just people that want to make sure their teams are in the best shape, whether it's football, basketball, volleyball, soccer, it's not the world they're living in terms of programming work to rest ratios to get the best sprint, because they don't live in that world really like we do in track or swimming all the time. So in just the most simplest form, a coach kind of thinking like, how do I apply this? Where should they be looking, or what should they be thinking about in terms of setting their teams up with conditioning?
Sure. And this is where I think training is, for athletic performance at the high school level, is that it's, and I don't mean highly, but it's most specific based on what you are asking athletes to do. Now, the caveats to that are they play multiple sports, and so maybe not even as specific as we think it is, but what should you be doing for conditioning? I think the biggest point to be made is that most people for a long time think of conditioning or thought of conditioning as running people into the ground. Yeah. Which, I mean, if we talk about our 3 energy systems, sounds most like that middle one, the pain. It's like, I want you to go super hard, I want you to go 100%, and I'm going to go until you can't go anymore, and I'm just going to keep pounding. Yeah. When in reality, most team sports, now, to be fair, if we look at like a wrestling, a combat sport, they're going to be a little bit more unique, right? Because they are going to go for 2 minutes all out and then have like 2 to 3 minutes off. Yeah. Or whatever the case may be. But for the most part, most team sports are going to require a combination of alactic, so that 10 seconds, 6 seconds, 12 seconds, 20 seconds of super high energy, go, 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 and then non-dead stop movement that is more aerobic based, so that you can move for a 2-hour, 3-hour football game, soccer game, that is emphasized by larger, more explosive bursts of energy. Right. So the cool thing is that you really want to focus on the 2 systems, alactic and aerobic. And what's awesome is that aerobic, the power of aerobic capacity is incredible. You mentioned before, it's the base upon which everything else is built. You want to know the best way to increase your ability to basically sprint repeatedly. We call speed endurance is probably the number one determining factor for all athletic performance on the field, right? Can you do something at 95, 100% repeatedly? Do you have a really, really good aerobic capacity? Yeah, because I think it gets to your point about, can you bring yourself back down a little bit? And you have to do it, and a lot of times in most sports, in that aerobic spot. You are jogging to the sideline, or you essentially are kind of moving up field or up court like that. You might not be in a dead sprint. You're not, running, the full court press, but you are moving up and down, and you have to be able to like get yourself back. Right. So, and not to jump into science again, but if you need that phosphocreatine system to produce a ton of energy to sprint, it depletes everything that it needs, and that's why it runs out. The way that you replenish all of those things, entirely dependent on your aerobic. Aerobic respiration is the reason that you're going to be able to go ahead and replenish everything and do it again. Yeah. So the better you are aerobically, the better you are alactically. And now, so that means you can kind of really do both things. And that's why this whole war on cardio, or like the football coaches, again, I am one, think, well, if we never sprint for more than 6 seconds, that's the only thing I'm ever going to do. For conditioning. Well, maybe not, right? Because if you don't have an aerobic base that takes weeks of consistent work that includes things like long, slow distance, there's nothing inherently evil for athletic performance on long, slow distance. People that are afraid of strength and power decreases, don't be. I mean, weightlifters, power lifters use cardio to improve their return on investment in the gym. Yeah. It's not going to hold you back. Not to the point that it is more of a detriment than it is a positive. Yep. So aerobic capacity is super, super important. So when we say conditioning, you want to do things that are focused on one of those 2. So either something where you're going to maybe sprint repeats, which would be hey, we're going to work for 10 seconds, but we need this much rest time, but I'm also going to work in aerobic capacity by maybe, as you said, maybe active rest. Yeah. Or you're going to work in longer intervals that are more aerobically inclined. And again, if you focus on both of them, instead of just saying I'm going to work until people are falling down, you're going to get the actual return for on the field performance. Again, I know that's kind of amorphous, it's all over the place, and I'm happy to field questions when people ask about it specifically, because there's a time and a place for everything.
Yeah, so like, let's just say, because I think it happens a lot at the high school level, a coach says, I'm going to dedicate maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes to conditioning at the beginning of the practice, at the end of the practice, at the end of a training session. Like, in your eyes, is that like, what does that like 20 to 30 minutes look like? And I know it's going to be different for each coach, going to be different for each sport, and that's a hard question to answer just in this kind of big blanket statement. But like, where and what could they be doing just as kind of a framework?
I'm going to cop out with a larger answer that is not unlike what we say for when you're like programming workouts. There is no answer that says like, this is the workout you should do for even X sport.
Yeah.
Right? You should have a plan, because that plan is going to say, well, on this many days a week, we're going to focus on the lactic system so that we're really good at expressing a lot of energy all at once. This many days a week, we're going to work on aerobic because we feel that that's important to the recovery of our lactic system. Or like, hey, we're in soccer, we don't have any subs, so we need to make sure that we're very aerobically inclined so that we can do anything alactically. And so the whole what should we do? Not only should you say, okay, I'm going to focus on alactic, this many sessions is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to focus on aerobic, this many sessions is how I'm going to do it. You don't want to completely dismiss glycolytic, right? You want to put that in there as well. Every tool has its place. And then the last piece, maybe second last piece, is it's got to be somewhat fun, or you're not going to get kids it's got to be engaging, maybe not fun. So if you have a plan, it can't just be like, this is the miracle conditioning that I'm going to do for football that's going to make us a better team.
Yep.
Who do I have? What do they need? What are the 4 different tools at my disposal? Should you do something like, okay, I'm going to mimic a quarter or a 2-minute drive where it's, hey, I'm going to have you sprint for 6 seconds, I'm going to have you jog for 25, and we're going to repeat that 30 times.
Yep.
And maybe that's the focus on maybe the blend of alactic and aerobic. And then maybe there's one where we're just going to go all out on speed work, because in season you should work at speed work as well.
Yep.
We're going to say, hey, we're going to work for 10 seconds, we're going to rest for 2,
right,
whatever. You need to have a plan. So I don't want to like say that there's one answer to that, but I think more about the summation of its parts.
Yeah, and I think to just kind of almost take a few steps back to what you were just talking about, like, I'm just starting out my season, and I had a group of kids that were like ready to go. They had set up the base, and I programmed a workout for my entire team with those kids in mind. And so they were hitting what they were supposed to do in terms of intensity levels and everything else. And then I looked to the other half of the group, and they're just plugging along, looking to continue to make it. And now that's not engaging to them because they're not getting that stimulus that I wanted. And so, like, not to dive too deep into the weeds, we regrouped, we reset, and we made it work for each of those groups. So like we actually got something out of it and weren't just calling it an aerobic set with an anaerobic. It just, labeling it and just to label it. And I think that's what a lot of coaches, myself included, sometimes get lost with is, I label it this, but is that what's happening when the kids are working? Who's the lead there? Is it aerobic? And you know what I mean?
And I think maybe the thing that I'll try to wrap it up with is, it's important to understand all these things so that you have a plan, but to think that there's going to be one miracle or one correct answer or one path to ultimate success is in everything. It's just not possible. Right?
Yeah.
So I think what's also important to note is it's not necessarily all about aerobic. It's not necessarily all about the lactic system or lactic system. There are other elements at play. As you said, it's got to be engaging. And then there's a whole train of thought that says that what we just talked about is just improving your fitness level, your fitness performance level. Do you have the potential to do something at a high level for this many times, this many reps, or whatever? There is a whole train of thought. Joel Jameson, a big time like conditioning and MMA expert guy, said that conditioning, like the truth of conditioning, is there's the fitness and then there's actual conditioning for performance, which includes something completely irrelevant to like respiration. And it's, are you developing the skill set required to perform under, say, fatigue? So like one thing that you need to learn through conditioning is how do you control your body mentally and physically? And do you focus on the correct movement patterns, efficiencies, et cetera, when you are tired? And we get mental toughness thrown around there a lot. No, a workout can't make you tough, But what conditioning absolutely can and should do is challenge you, not just run you into the ground, but say, hey, this is our goal. We're gonna operate at this capacity, but your focus today is on making sure you move this way every single time, because you can train yourself to say, even when I'm tired, I'm not gonna let things go to crap.
Right. And that's where I think, like, to your point, where like the old, I don't want to use the word old school, but like the let's just run them into the ground conditioning has its merit, where people are saying, because I want to build up that mental toughness. It's always been associated to the two, but I think it's a good point, because like that mental toughness doesn't have to exist in the pure, like, I can't peel myself off the ground at the end of it. Right. It's more so, can I maintain the discipline in movements, in attitude, and all these different things, that when it gets tough, I'm not just scraping along and letting myself kind of get out of it. I'm focused. I'm in it. I'm supporting my teammates. All of those other kind of soft skills that we talk about.
Yeah, the mental toughness thing is a bit of a misnomer. It's less about, are you forcing them to suffer?
Yeah.
And it's more about, are you creating an environment that is challenging them physically, but is requiring them at the same time to be kind of intentional with their mental approach.
Yeah.
So like, even for example, we hear coaches all the time. I no longer say this. Like, I want 100% effort. Well, can you do that ever more than once?
Right.
You can't go 100% all the time. So learning what your 100% is, learning what 90% is, learning what your 50% is, learning what you can do and when you need rest. How much rest? How do I rest?
Yeah.
What can I actually expend? If I'm in the middle of the fourth quarter and there's drive, we're going to score a touchdown. I know everybody wants to say, I need the literal heart on your sleeve, fall down 100% effort on every play. Not possible, because then you have to come off the field when you're done. But if you know, hey, I can do X, X, and X at this percentage and still be able to go the next play, that is what we mean by conditioning. You can, in the skill set sense of the word, dynamic energy expenditure control. I can create this much, I can operate at this efficiency, and this is how I'll recover, and I'm going to be able to go again.
Yeah, and I think the other part in terms of that control, the controls in the mental toughness, the controls in those different things, and as we get better at the base, we move the aerobic up, we're going to be able to control ourselves within anaerobic and the quicker spurts a little bit better if we can kind of maintain all three. And I've seen the visual, and you mentioned a few OPEX and others, where it's kind of like you see the line, and to move one part up, you kind of have to move them all up.
Yes.
And if you move one up crazy amount, hey, I got really, really good at aerobic, and that's all I ever focused on. And like you mentioned, I never went and did any sprints or anything else like that. Hey, you can go run a marathon, but you might not be able to,
a highly specialized return isn't necessarily what anybody that we work with is looking for.
Yeah.
Right? And I think everybody thinks that they are.
Yeah.
Like, I'm this athlete, this is what I want. Well, let's pull it back, because even those like marathoners, etc., do not actually perceive their goals as specific as we think they do. I know Colin's talked about it in the past, like the specialization, even as a sprinter, or you were a swimmer, right, in college, like you have your distance. Is that the only thing you trained?
Right. No, for sure.
Absolutely not, because you know that there are values that play into your return that are outside of the literal, this is my event, this is how much I have to expend, and this is the time I'm doing.
Yeah, and I reference to it, and I think it's a great example, and I know it's not as simple as it turns off, but there's a certain point, and we've all felt it, if we've done it, we think we're at that anaerobic, and all of a sudden,
You're really anaerobic.
that falls off the cliff.
Yeah.
Like at that minute mark, all of a sudden something else has to kick in.
Yeah.
And where is it? Is it there? So I think that's probably a good stopping point, unless you have anything else to just kind of wrap up. But that certainly has been a good kind of navigation in terms of defining the three kind of main groups that we look at, the training systems within, talking about what we mean by conditioning, and really, in terms of application, knowing what is leading and what we want kind of as the goal or the end result.
Yeah, I think when push comes to shove, it's the same message we preach everywhere all the time about everything, is there's no right and wrong. It's, do you have a plan and a reason, right? So
right.
I have a goal. this is how I'm going to achieve that goal because I know this is how this works.
Yep.
And once you've identified those things and you approach them, kind of systematically, there's no real wrong way to go about it.
For sure. And those watching on YouTube can see I am getting a red blinking battery light on my screen. So what better time to wrap up than right now? So thanks again for everybody listening. Again, reach out to us if you have any questions or you want to have a conversation with Coach Brez, myself, or anybody here on our platform team, as well as our larger community. Thanks again. And remember, at Platform, it's always in pursuit of better.